Good afternoon. It is Monday, December 8th. Welcome to the Transportation and Environment Committee. We have 4 items on our agenda this afternoon, and we are going to swap out the order. We're going to start with items 2, 3, and 4, and then circle back to item number 1. So to start, item number 2 is an amendment to the FY24 to 30 Capital Improvements Program and supplemental appropriation 2624 to the FY26 capital budget for Montgomery County Government, Transportation, Department of Transportation, Burtonsville Access Road, and that is in the amount of $1,050,000. I see our friends with MCDOT. As I noted, this is a supplemental appropriation. It's actually $1.5 million in GO bonds, and this funding is for the Burtonsville Access Road project, which will provide a new roadway between Spencerville Road and the School Access Road, both in Burtonsville. And my understanding is that this appropriation is necessary because as work has begun, it was determined that the soil beneath that road or the soil underneath where the road would go is not solid enough, and so greater reinforcements are needed to make that road possible. And so, Mr. Kenny, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I will defer to MCDOT for further detail on the operational considerations. But I will note in terms of fiscal impact, this supplemental appropriation of $1,050,000 draws upon the $16.8 million GO bond set aside for FY26. This supplemental and several others under consideration at the end of this calendar year will draw that set aside down to $8.3 million. So, leaving us in a good position to sustain other costs increases over the remainder of the fiscal year.
And thank you for that clarification. I have the 5 inverted in 2 different areas, but it is $1,050,000, not $1.5 million. Yes. MCDOT,
I think you summarized it well. The soils under the road, there was a issue with the calculation of volume of unsuitable soil, and the cost to replace that soil are greater than anticipated.
Got to get the road work done. Any other comments or questions? We're good. So without objection, we will approve that supplemental. Thank you. The next item, which on the packet is listed as item number 3, this is a resolution to approve a memorandum of understanding between the City of Rockville and Montgomery County regarding transportation improvements that will be eligible for funding with the development impact tax for transportation improvements revenue that are collected by the City of Rockville. A few weeks ago, we approved a similar MOU for the City of Gaithersburg, so I am pleased that the department and the executive branch have worked out a similar arrangement with the city, and we have representatives from the city here. If you want to introduce yourself. And
yes, good afternoon. My name is Jim Woods. I'm the acting director of Public Works for the City of Rockville.
Very good. And Mr. Woods, just to get you on the record, the city wants this MOU, yes?
Yes, that's correct. The City of Rockville is in support of the MOU and the changes noted in the draft.
Fantastic. Thank you. I know the mayor and the rest of the city council have been have been following this, have been a part of it, and have been negotiating it. So shout out to Mayor Ashton and everybody else and within the city for doing this. Director Conklin, very similar to the Gaithersburg program.
It's very similar to the Gaithersburg program. There are 2 differences between this MOU and the one you've reviewed before. One is that this MOU includes the list of projects in the MOU. And secondly, this MOU is purely a reimbursable arrangement between the city and the county, whereas the Gaithersburg MOU had an installment payment basis for the accumulated balance. So Those are differences. I don't know that they're earth-shattering differences, but they are the differences that emerged as a result of the discussion with the city, where the city wanted to have the belt and suspenders of that project list in both places.
Thank you. For anyone who wants the details, they are in the packet, but they basically break down to shared use paths, bicycle bridge, other bike share stations, and bus rapid transit facilities as well. So everything that we all agree on, and I know the city of Rockville will continue leading on multimodal transit and safety. And so I appreciate their list. And without any objection, Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. I just had a quick, I think Director Conklin, you answered that question, that in conversations with the city of Rockville, you wanted more belts and suspenders, as you said, versus Gaithersburg. And I know, particularly with Gaithersburg, we had gone back and forth quite a bit over even a number of years. But everyone feels very comfortable with this, not just for now, but into the future, the approach we're taking with Rockville.
Yes, City of Rockville does support the approach of having the list of projects in both the MOU and in the county CIP. We felt that was a better approach, and the list of projects, at least from our perspective, are going to take several decades to complete. So we don't expect to be coming back and amending that list anytime soon.
Great. Just wanted to get that on the record. I'm good. Thank you.
Very good. A lot of it just getting it on the record that we're all in agreement. And you are correct, Mr. Woods, about these projects taking a long time. So I'm glad they're now here and they're codified, and we'll continue to work and make them a reality. And as luck would have it, we have the district council member right here.
If I was 2 minutes late, I would have, 2 minutes later, I would have missed this entire meeting, which is a good thing. I just wanted to very publicly thank you for doing all of this. I know to Councilmember Stewart's point, the discussions with Gaithersburg were slightly different than the discussions with Rockville, but we're glad that all of it is working out the way it should work out. So thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, council member. And without objection, we will approve this MOU. So thank you to the city, thank you to the department as well, and the county executive. And
You can stay for invasive.
we'll see you in 45 minutes.
I might have learned a little bit in life. I think I'll be good.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor for Life Katz. Mr. Woods, thank you very much. The third item this afternoon, which is item number 4 in the packet, is an amendment to the FY 25-30 Capital Improvements Program and Supplemental Appropriation 2638 to the FY 26 Capital Budget, Montgomery County Government Department of Transportation, Rockville Transportation Improvements, and that is in the amount of $6,816,000, and a source of funds are impact taxes, and this dovetails with the previous item in that it is a CIP amendment and supplemental appropriation for those capital improvements, and as noted, the source of funds are impact taxes. Anything else that we didn't address, Mr. Kenny?
Yeah, so these are, thank you, these are impact tax revenues collected in the city of Rockville in the past that can only be spent on projects in the city of Rockville, so this CIP project creates that venue, and I will note that the council staff brought up an amendment to the CIP project for the city of Gaithersburg, just sort of a procedural amendment in terms of how to allocate future dollars to county projects. That language was, by the time it was transmitted, had already been suggested by the council and then baked into this transmittal as well. So this is clears that sort of hurdle procedurally, and so no amendments this time.
Fantastic. And I will say the leaders of the 3rd Councilmatic District have impeccable timing, not only with Councilmember Katz arriving, but Mayor Ashton has just walked in. Good news, we already approved the MOU. We're now at the capital budget, so welcome any comments that you want to share, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I just want to say this has been long awaited. We appreciate all the work with your team to get this impact tax approved. We have projects ready to go, and so we appreciate the swift action on this, and thank you to the Rockville team as well.
Fantastic. And we were collectively noting the scope of the projects that you've identified, and they're really worthy projects that won't be built overnight, but I'm glad they're already shovel ready for some of them, and we look forward to that continued partnership. So thank you, Madam Mayor. Director Conklin, you're good?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're good. So without objection, we will approve that that special appropriation as well. I'm sorry, the special appropriation to the FY26 capital budget. Thank you to the city and to MCDOT and to budget. And Mr. Kenny. And now the T&E committee will put on the E hat and circle back to item number 1 on our agenda, which will take a little more time to dig into. I saw that at least Jim got that. Okay. So, welcome everybody. This item is a review of Bill 2625, Vegetation Invasive Plants. I introduced this legislation earlier this year so that we would be able to exempt native plants and grasses from weed removal requirements and prohibit the sale of invasive bamboo. Last year, in the General Assembly, Delegate Linda Foley introduced legislation and passed legislation that allow local jurisdictions to moderate the sale of invasive bamboo, recognizing that it sometimes pits neighbors against neighbors and that it costs a lot of money to remediate. And so we're working to figure out how to ease concerns among certain communities and also promote more pollinators in Montgomery County, recognizing we're in a climate crisis and that there are struggles with birds, bees, and other types of flora and fauna as well. And so what this bill does is redefines the word weed and provides a new definition as a native plant and grass. And in working with a number of native plant experts, the Department of Environmental Protection and also the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, we've proposed several amendments that we'll get into in this packet. And then we'll have the conversation with DEP about other amendments that you have proposed or thoughts for additional consideration. But with that, Mr. Gorzalak, I'll turn it over to you to walk us through.
Yeah, of course. So Chair Glass gave an excellent overview of his bill, so I'll just jump through, quickly go through the impact statements as well as the public testimony. Then the executive branch did bring a PowerPoint presentation with them. I think it might make sense for them to make any introductory remarks, introduce themselves as well, and go through that PowerPoint before we march through the amendments in the staff report.
Appreciate that. So if everybody wants to introduce yourself, we'll start over here and work our way down.
Good afternoon. I'm Laura Miller with Montgomery County's Department of Environmental Protection.
I'm Jody Rose, Section Chief for Stewardship in the Watershed Restoration Division in the Department of Environmental Protection.
Mary Travellini, also with the Department of Environmental Protection.
Good afternoon. I'm Nathan Bovell. I'm the Division Chief for Community Development at DHCA.
And good afternoon, Tamala Robinson. I am the Manager for Code Enforcement with DHCA.
Okay. So I do know that you have a PowerPoint ready to go. I have some amendments that I would like to introduce, so let's first dispense of those amendments, and then we can take up the PowerPoint, which is predicated on the amendments that you have offered, correct? I think that's a fair way.
Sounds great. I'll march through the impact statements really quickly first.
Okay.
All right. The fiscal impact, DEP did not anticipate a fiscal impact through OMB. The Office of Legislative Oversight noted a small but positive impact on their climate assessment. Minimal impact on racial equity and social justice, and minimal impact on economic impact from the Office of Legislative Oversight. There was a large amount of public testimony, but frankly, a lot of it was related to the companion ZTA that was introduced with this. To the extent testimony submitted either written or in person before the council was actually touching on 2625, it was overwhelmingly in support of the bill. So moving through the amendments that are set forth in the staff report beginning on page 3. Chair Glass, would you like to speak to each of these, or would you like me to?
If you want to introduce it,
Great.
and then I'll speak to it.
Perfect. So as introduced, Bill 2625 retained what was the existing definition of weed, which had sort of an enumerated list that was not perfectly all-encompassing. It included some of what has been identified as a noxious weed or invasive species by various state entities, but it was not exhaustive, but it had some of those. So this amendment would delete the enumerated list of different species that were within the definition of weed, but then rather notes that points to the list maintained by the Maryland Department of Agriculture by regulation, as well as the Maryland Invasive Species Council list of invasive species of concern. I will note on page A4 of the memorandum submitted by the CE, there is an amendment that sort of touches on this same area of the bill, and it's all part of a different regulatory scheme that's set forth in page A3 through A5 of the addendum.
And I'll pick up on that last point first, and for colleagues and for the administration that's here. The reason I want to go through my amendments is to refine some of what was introduced, which is based on the public input and input also with the administration. And then you also have some thoughts after. So we'll take up my bill on the legislative side first, and then we'll hear the executive side and the possible amendments there. So colleagues, so this first amendment does, let me phrase it this way. We were trying to find a set of plants based on various organizations, levels of government. From, first we started looking at the Department of Agriculture at the national level, and then what we've whittled it down to is referencing and mirroring the Maryland Department of Agriculture and the Maryland Invasive Species Council, so that we can all be aligned in our definitions of those plants. And so that is the amendment that I'm putting forward now. Okay, without objection.
All right. The second amendment set forth was to allow for an immediate action for the protection of public health and safety, as set forth on pages 3 to 4 of the staff report. It would note that if the Director of Housing and Community Affairs finds the immediate action is needed to protect the public health and safety as a result of violation, the Director may order the owner to immediately correct or abate the violation. I will also flag that on addendum page 6, there is a similar but distinct amendment offered by the executive branch.
Thank you, Mr. Orgorzelak. So in all of our conversations, there was some concern stated about either the plants, the native plants that would be growing, but more so it was about what would be attracted by those native plants. And there was some concern stated about animals or insects that would gravitate towards those native plants. And so recognizing that nature is nature, but some people might not like that, this amendment allows DHCA to make corrective action if something is deemed improper. Yeah, Councilmember Balcom. Oh yeah, no, I'm good.
So thank you, and I appreciate that. So my concern is what might happen is the individual homeowners who are who this will apply to may not have the means to rectify it, to mow or take care of it. And I think that there might be an outsized impact on people who simply don't have the means either financially or even physically or mentally be able to handle it. So I do have a concern about that, the immediate action. I understand that the law is already in place for a 10-day notice, and it would be interesting to see what happens if the individual just can't physically do that. So that's one question. And perhaps DHCA can answer what currently happens. But I also think that when we look at, and I don't object to it, but I do think that we should talk about
Further
that.
conversation, for sure.
But also removal by the county. This amendment goes under 48-4, but I think that there has to be some reference to it in 58-5 in terms of, because that still says the 10-day notice. So there might need to be an amendment, line 42, Mr. Grzelak, in the bill.
Sorry, can you repeat the line number? I think
Yes.
the reference would be in.
Line 42 of the,
Yes, I see it. Thank you.
yeah, so perhaps it would say within the notice period.
I think that would be fine. As a practical matter, and Ms. Robinson or Mr. Bovell can comment as well, typically the county does not go in for what's colloquially called a clean and lean until it also has a court order to such, which is well beyond, but I don't know if you can refine that.
So currently, under 2615, which is our, we would go in, and that requires us to post the property and give 10-day notice before we actually perform the cleaning lien. So it would contradict 26 if we didn't put the 10-day notice in there. 2615, severe conditions.
Well, I guess the question is, if in the notice we're saying that there's a 10-day notice period, but in the case of an emergency, it's immediate, right? That's what that amendment says, and so there has to be some reference to that, or then the removal by the county isn't immediate.
So it isn't immediate now currently either, because we do have to give that 10-day period for us to go in. And so even though it's health and safety under severe conditions, we're required to give that notice and allow the property owner to do it prior to going in.
Which is contradictory to the amendment that's on the table.
I agree with the disconnect that
Right.
Councilmember Balcom was pointing out here, that with the addition of the amendment, I think it's a fair point to say that if there was something that DHCA deemed to be of such urgency that immediate action was taken, right now as drafted, even with the second amendment that we're talking about here, there would not be a mechanism for DHCA to come in and remove the violation until 10 days occurs, which I think to Councilmember Balcom's point would sort of defeat the purpose of why do we have this immediacy. So I understand, and I think that the offered amendment would, from Councilmember Balcom, in line 42 of the bill as introduced, would be does not comply within the applicable notice period rather than 10 days. And that would capture both the 10 days for normal violations as well as the immediate requirement for this. Now, of course, that would open up questions of, well, how long does immediate mean? How long does DHCA have to wait before, after giving the immediate, is 48 hours sufficient? Which is why, in terms of actual application, typically the county waits for a court order to issue an abatement order, which allows them to execute on these. But certainly they're not required to under the county code. And they don't, it's not universal that they would do that. But I definitely take Councilmember Balcom's point that to sort of align the immediacy of the violation with the ultimate rectification of the violation, it might make sense to include that amendment as well.
Thank you. And then from the perspective of when you do go in and clean, is there anecdotal or data to show who these homeowners are and whether they have the means to do it themselves?
We can certainly, try to get that data for you. Typically, it's most of our vacant properties that we'll have to go in and clean. Sometimes there are, as you stated, residents that may not be able to afford that. Typically, we try to work with them to see what we could do, but then we, at a certain point when it becomes that severe, we have to take action. But I can certainly.
Yeah, and is there a way? What I'm concerned about is, we have residents who are just holding on to their homes by a thread. And if this puts it over the edge, what resources does the county have to go in there and help them without placing a lien on their property?
Could I pick up on this?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, for us, typically we have to put the lien on the property based on, the contractors and so forth and the work that's done. I don't know of a resource that could assist, but there are some, nonprofits that we kind of refer them to say, hey, can you, that may be able to help. And certainly we would give them that referral, but.
And roughly how many a year do you do of these kinds of things?
Liens? I can get that number for you.
I just,
from 100
like, are
to
we talking about
150?
3
Yeah.
or are we talking about 300 kind of thing?
Yeah, anywhere from 100 to 150 per, and typically during the growing season is when we actually perform these.
Okay, thank you. So those are just my concerns on that.
Great. Thank you for raising that. And what I'm hearing you articulate are actually two different aspects.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And so first, let's go through with existing properties and those who might not be able to maintain those properties. There's currently a blighted and abandoned property bill, right, law, that says grasses cannot grow above a certain height. And if a home is neglected, abandoned, blighted, neglected, not sure what is in the statute, but then when neighbors contact DHCA, that homeowner needs to remediate. And so that's already existing law. Secondly, what I think differentiates this from that situation is that is mere neglect of what is currently on the property. What this legislation intends to do is protect the intentional growth of vegetation, right? And so I'm not sure where the neglect would come in because it's intentional growth. But if there is an emergency, if there's a pest or something, the second half of your question was about the 10 days and about the immediacy. And I'm just, the question I'll ask in return is, what is the immediacy? What is the immediate emergency that would accompany vegetation that has grown? If it is an animal or an insect, what needs to be remediated within that certain time period that can't wait 10 days or so forth?
I don't have that answer to what that emergency is.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure there is one. Right.
Yeah.
Someone might not like whatever animal or insect that exists in our community, underscore and highlight that. Animals and insects that exist in our community, they might not like them being outside down the block, but it is nothing in my, I don't believe that it rises to an emergency level.
If I may,
please.
Chairman, off the top of my head, one of the things that might rise to an emergency level are when the plants get to a sufficient height or growth that they're encroaching into the roadway or the walkway. If addresses aren't available, so if emergency personnel were going to respond to an emergency and you can't identify the address of a house, that would constitute an emergency. We had lots of thought and discussion about how do we allow the native plants to exist and to support what you're asking in this bill, but also to protect the residents themselves and their neighbors. So I think when we think about addresses, when we think about growth that comes into the walkway, growth that blocks signage, growth that blocks the view from driveways or roadways, those are the types of things that we would consider an emergency because they could actually lead to other hazards. We also had some discussions about pest infestation, and certain types of growth may contribute to those types of things, and we don't want to contribute to that, but we want to allow the native plants to exist. So I think there are some conditions that we need to consider as emergency and that need to be remediated.
I appreciate you elaborating on that. Yeah, Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. Just getting back to the point of where this exists in other law. So I guess I'm raising the same questions as the chair is why this is needed here. I'm for the native plants, but I'm also not for native plants blocking signs and blocking walkways.
Right.
So it doesn't make a difference to me if it's native or invasive. If it's endangering public health or safety, and that is already taken care of in other parts of our code, why do we need this?
Some of them are in other parts of the code, but some of them also may sort of overlap or conflict with the native plants. And that was one of the reasons why we had changed this to look at vegetation in general so it can address all aspects. I actually had some prepared statements that we're going to go through some of our concerns that might be helpful for us to go through before we go through each of the articles, if you would be amenable to that.
I'm open to it, but I also know that you have your own amendments. And so what I wanted to do is some housekeeping on our end to then present a bill that the committee is comfortable with for then you to be able to share your thoughts and further amend it. So if it's relevant to this section, and I believe that you do have proposed amendments very similar to this, right? Mm-hmm. So we will revisit this conversation. I just wanted to clean it up on our end so that we can have a one-on-one conversation rather than deal with two amendments at the same time.
If I can step in briefly as well about the question about why should it be in here if it may be stated elsewhere, is that as a resident of the county myself who needs to look up a code, if I'm looking up a code related to vegetation, I want to be able to see what it all is in one place. And instead of it saying in here that there's a reference back to another code, which is very complicated for folks that might struggle with access into information. And, you know, if you look up something in ComCore and you even use certain search terms, it's very difficult to get down to the core of what applies to my property. So there are instances where DHCA and as well as other supporting agencies like DEP, DOT, DGS, DPS, because this law would apply also to county properties. It would be very clear to a stakeholder that when they're in here, that it is stated related to vegetation, not necessarily a reference back to another code.
Yeah, I very much appreciate that. I'm going to leave that to Mr. Ogorzalak because part of the issue of why we do bills, we reference other parts of the code is because then if we change something, it's automatically changed throughout. So what happens if we just try and take language and make sure we're repeating it in different parts, we can inadvertently make a change to something and not make that throughout the code, and that happens. and then that adds to confusion. So I really appreciate that point, and this is something I would leave to our attorneys as we're thinking about this, because there are reasons why we refer to other parts of the code and do that to make sure that if we go back and make changes, that it's carried through.
So I want to go back to Councilmember Balcom's point, right? And if I heard you correctly, you would just prefer to strike this amendment or streamline it?
Well, the question, the overarching question is, what does immediate mean, right? And from the perspective of, we already have 10 days in place. And when we talk about an emergency, if we're talking about plant growth that's covering the street sign, that's been going on for a very long time, or covering the sidewalk. And so the immediacy may be that that's when the complaint happened. But I don't I don't see the immediacy of coming in somewhere between, it's not going to be that day, it might be the day after, 2 days later. So the difference between coming in and cleaning it out in 3 or 4 days to 10 days, it seems a little bit arbitrary because the emergency is, it would have been happening for a long time before vegetation is reaching up the point of having an emergency like that, I think.
Yeah, I think for us, part of it is when is the county put on notice? So if we receive a complaint and we go out and investigate, at that point, the county has been put on notice that there is a condition that occurs that could be detrimental to something. It's a health and safety issue. If we see that, then we're incumbent to sort of act on it and to do something to protect the health and safety of everyone else. So I think that while it may have been happening for a long time, we often go into houses where there have been conditions
Of course.
or that have been happening for a long time. But once we see it, then we are incumbent to act on it and to do something about it.
I understand that and respect that. So realistically, if you go in, look at it, and you consider it to be an emergency, how long would it take you to rectify it?
So depending on what it is, but typically it's the 10-day time frame, and once after the 10 days, the 10 days is basically to give the resident time to cure it themselves, and then we go in thereafter. So
Even if you consider it an emergency?
Even if we consider it an emergency. I mean, some certain emergencies we can do it within 24 to 48 hours, but because of grass and weeds and the way 26 reads, and 58, it's that 10-day time period.
If that's what we do now.
Right.
Yeah, I think we leave it.
Okay, you're okay with that,
Yep.
the amendment? Okay, we'll take up the amendment without objection, knowing that we'll come back to this conversation in some augmented form in a little bit.
Sorry, so if I understand exactly what we're doing with the second amendment
Correct.
offered in the staff report, are we just gonna?
We are accepting it.
We're accepting that, and we're making no further changes related to the enforcement by the county.
Excuse me, I do think that we need to make that tiny adjustment on line 42.
Yeah, I just want to make sure. It's really kind of two amendments, I'll say. So the first amendment is the one set forth in the staff report on page 4, which requires the director to require immediate action. And I'm hearing that has been accepted by the committee without exception. And then we'll call it the Balcom Amendment, the Balcom Rider, is a second amendment that, and I'll read it into the record so we're all clear. It would amend line 42 of the bill as introduced by deleting the words within 10 days. And I think I would add by the deadline set forth in the notice.
Okay, sounds great.
All right, and that's without
The
exception.
Balcom Rider, I like it.
Okay. Moving on, the third amendment set forth in the packet was an amendment to delete the appeals process. As introduced, the bill contained a new appeals process to the Board of Appeals. This would simply just delete that and go back to the way it is presently enforced. I'll note that pages A6 and A7 of the executive's memorandum include an identical proposed amendment.
Thank you for articulating that. This basically clears up that as we were working through the legislative process, an original draft referenced the removal of the bamboo, recognizing the actual fiscal note that would incur. We're completely removing that without objection. Great.
Okay, so moving on to Amendment 4, also on page 4 of the staff report. This is related to Article 2 of Chapter 58, the second turn of the bill. And this is an amendment to clarify the definition of invasive bamboo. It is strictly sort of a biological explanation of how best to define the problem that the bill is seeking to address.
Again, when this bill was in draft form and after it got introduced, we heard from incredible experts all throughout the county and state who wanted to share their expertise with us. And this amendment and definition is where we landed in terms of invasive bamboo. Without objection.
The fifth amendment set forth in the staff report, starting on page 4 and spilling on to page 5, is an amendment to exempt certain consumer bamboo uses from regulation and to clarify the restriction on planting and transplanting invasive bamboo. This amendment really unfolds as two parts. The first would clarify, it's in the letter A of this section, that the sale of invasive bamboo does not include indoor bamboo houseplants and decoration, bamboo for consumption, and cut and dried bamboo stalks. Basically, the language as it had been introduced was a little bit overbroad for what the intent of this was, which was to deal with bamboo in yards that is actually causing a problem. These are the types of bamboo that are still sold, but do not cause, they don't create that same issue within the county. And then letter B just clarifies that a person may not plant or transplant invasive bamboo on any property in the county. So this would capture that sort of bamboo that might be purchased outside of the county, but then brought in and planted or moved about to prohibit that as well.
This is the heart of the legislation and the work that Delegate Foley did in Annapolis to make sure that the invasive bamboo does not continue spreading, and the best way to do that is by prohibiting the sale and planting of it, and that's what this amendment further clarifies.
And I'll just flag, sorry, before the vote,
no.
just as I've been doing on addendum page 7, the executive actually deleted the sale element or in a proposed amendment, and then the second element related to the transplant and planting, they offered an identical.
Again, we will get to that in due time. We just want to present the cleaner bill to them. So without objection on this language, great. And then we have one more.
One more, and this relates to the delegation of authority over invasive bamboo regulation. The amendment set forth here on page 5 of the staff report would basically bifurcate so that the violations related to the sale of bamboo within the county would go to the Department of Environmental Protection, which my understanding from the executive branch is they are, and as set forth in their memorandum, that is the best agency to enforce that prohibition.
That was a lengthy conversation during the bill writing, which department would monitor this, and DEP won. So congratulations, DEP. And that's what this amendment clarifies, without objection. And so those are the amendments. Now, I appreciate DHCA and DEP joining us because you all have a number of thoughts. You have your own PowerPoint presentation and you have your amendments that you would like for consideration for us. So with that, Mr. LaBelle, I'll turn it over to you if you want to walk us through your PowerPoint.
Oh, thank you so much. Before we get to the PowerPoint, we do have a brief prepared statement. I'm not a speed reader, but I'm going to try to get through it
the floor is yours.
As quickly as possible. Let me first begin by stating that DEP and DHCA and other departments fully support the intent of this bill. Our joint efforts have been focused on ensuring that the components of this bill are enforceable, clearly understood by the county officials, county residents, and the staff that are charged with enforcing it. While it's unfortunate that you didn't get our recommendations earlier, we prepared and transmitted through the county exec our recommendations to this bill. While on the surface, a lot in this bill appears to be very clear and very simple, the implementation and enforcement is actually quite complicated. The collective departments have worked diligently to identify items that require further clarification or revision in an effort to strengthen the bill. We're collectively available in this environment or others to clarify and address any questions you might have. So I'm going to sort of go through our statements here. The county exec offers amendments to the bill for council's consideration. The Departments of Housing and Community Affairs and the Departments of Environmental Protection worked with several departments to develop and build upon the bill to increase native plants and the acceptance of native alternatives to traditional lawns. While DHCA enforces Chapter 58, we've worked closely for months with DEP to review the bill and to meticulously develop further amendments to enhance enforcement. These proposed revisions to the bill, along with descriptions of the changes, are provided in the staff package. Additionally, we have prepared slides to illustrate how the proposed revisions would actually be enforced. DHCA and DEP have long recognized the need to revise Chapter 58. The departments have regularly discussed complaints regarding vegetation that were challenging to address, and the introduction of Bill 2625 created a timely opportunity to update the code and provide for more effective administration of the chapter. We have solicited and received input from other departments whose enforcement efforts and operations are impacted by this section of the code, including permitting services, transportation, and Department of General Services. We are hoping to work closely to ensure that all of the code is robust, enforceable, and clear to property owners, and we'd like the opportunity to review the suggested amendments. So here's where I'd like to go through some of our changes to the articles. Proposed languages clarifies ambiguities for property owners and assists county inspectors who have limited plant identification knowledge, making education and enforcement cleaner. Proposed definitions eliminate the need for specific plant identification while encouraging a broader acceptance of native plants and naturalized gardens. Furthermore, this removes a need for plant lists, which are limiting and require regular revisions. Personally, as I've done some research on some of this, there are plants that were initially considered to be invasive that were later found to be native. And as this process continues to grow, I think more of that's going to be happen, which is one of the reasons, more of that will happen, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to be more broad in our approach. These proposed amendments open the door to well-maintained meadows and patches of new forest in place of monoculture lawns, and by allowing vegetation not to exceed current height restrictions throughout most areas of a property. This is a desired goal of our constituents and aligns with the county goals and also with this bill. Language is proposed to clarify the conditions in which vegetation is regulated, simplify enforcement actions for DHCA, and support goals to allow for more native plants. Language would alter the chapter title from Weeds to Vegetation and Article 1 from Weeds and Invasive Plants to General Vegetation, because this change clarifies for everyone, especially the stakeholders and the public, what the code is applicable to. Definitions would be amended to alter types of properties subject to Chapter 58. The current language for the applicability limits Chapter 58 only to subdivisions, which are narrowly defined and does not include all private or county property. DHCA currently uses Chapter 26 to address most vegetation enforcement matters. Proposed definitions will change the applicability of the law by removing the definition of subdivision and adding definitions of persons and property owners. I think that's a huge component that we need to consider as we move forward with this. Proposed amendments to added definition of lawns to clarify enforcement of neglected areas. DHCA currently relies on Chapter 26 to manage overgrown lawns, but defining and regulating overgrown lawns is best regulated within Chapter 58. Language would remove the proposed definition of native plants and existing definitions of weeds and add new definitions of vegetation. DHCA and DEP do not have staff sufficiently trained in plant identification to identify herbaceous plants year-round. An expert level of botanical knowledge is required to identify thousands of different plants during all 4 seasons, and there are no county staff with these skills. DHCA has received over 700 weed complaints in FY25 alone. It is not operationally feasible to enforce complaints about weeds if inspectors are required to identify specific native plants. Identifying or creating appropriate native plant lists for all allowable vegetation requires botanical expertise and constant updating. Creating lists specific to Montgomery County is difficult, especially considering the changing climate and plant migration. Ultimately, the list limits options even within native plants. Collectively revising the bill with these definitions allows for more native plants to be acceptable in most situations while providing clarity during inspections and enforcement without the need for identifying individual plants. The current definition of weed creates significant ambiguity for both DHCA code inspectors and property owners, leading to inconsistent interpretations of what vegetation requires corrective action and in which areas. By removing the definition and adding one for vegetation eliminates confusion, strengthens the clarity of the regulations, and ensures consistent, fair, and enforceable standards for both property owners and DHCA code enforcement. This provides for more acceptance of natural and native landscapes. Proposed amendments alter locations on properties where the code is applicable. Most vegetation complaints occur in highly visible areas, such as along property lines, sidewalks, roadways, and structures. It is imperative that DHCA code enforcement can properly enforce vegetation growth on individual properties for the community. These recommendations make a shift from the species of plants or specific circumstances under which vegetation complaints may be addressed under Chapter 58. The proposed amendment states that a person or property owner must not allow vegetation to grow more than 12 inches high within 10 feet of the property boundary, structure, sidewalk, or curb, unless it is intentionally maintained with techniques such as regular pruning, weeding, mulching, edging, or other routine garden maintenance.
Mr. Bovell?
Yes.
If I may, is this part of the PowerPoint presentation?
The implementation of how to interpret it is part of the PowerPoint presentation.
Because what you're sharing is an overview. It sounds like it will be part of the commentary on the PowerPoint, and then you're also talking about amendments that are being proposed, and so there might be redundancies in the presentation.
So do you propose that we go through the PowerPoint presentation or continue?
Well, we're going to be talking about many of these issues in the amendments that you're proposing, so I would ask you to hold off on some of that because you're going to restate some of those concerns in a few moments.
So in that case, we can allow Ms. Robinson to share the PowerPoint and give an explanation of the slides that we have.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we put together some real life samples of things that we deal with on a daily basis. So the first set of slides you'll see are examples of gardens that would not require code enforcement if proposed amendments from the executives are adopted. And these are identifications of native plants would be difficult, right? Tiny edge and educational signs, cues to care. That's one. Next one is a garden that is not within 10 feet of the property boundary or structure, which is in compliance, but this is what it would look like. Both neighbors have gardens and lawns that are well maintained here, even at the property line, which is in compliance. And then here, vegetation does not inhibit free or safe passage and is highly maintained. It's in compliance, but then again, what is native and what is not? A meadow-like vegetation, an idea for some property owners or complaints for others. So it's mowed edge, free, clear passage, clearly being maintained, and it's in compliance. And so this is someone's dream sidewalk strip, which is another one's complaint for us. Mostly in compliance, we'd ask the owner to trim any blocking visibility or inhibiting free or safe passage here. And then again, what is native and what is not. So here are examples of gardens that would require code enforcement if a proposed amendment from the executives are adopted. It would require lawns to be mowed and kept below 12 inches, which is currently under our Chapter 26. Mulch beds that became weedy but not within 10 feet of property lines, so no enforcement would be needed in this area. But it requires vegetation management near the mailboxes and curb edges. And then, no cues to care or inhibits free and safe passages of moving or parked cars here, as you can see. Requires trimming vegetation and showing cues to care within the 10 feet of the curb. And then no cues to care within 10 feet of the property line and structures. A state noxious weed has taken over the gardens here and requires vegetation management. So vegetation is blocking windows, structural inspections, which requires vegetation management within 10 feet of the structure, especially when you're dealing with the egress that is coming up the home. So we'd have to enforce that. And then again, what is native and what is not. Vegetation covering windows, again, same type of situation here where it's covering windows and doors, air units and preventing home safety inspections. Multiple code administered by DHC are applicable here. And vegetation spreading past property lines require vegetation management within the 10 feet property line, which is around here. And that was basically what we wanted to kind of give you an idea of what we...
Okay, thank you for that PowerPoint presentation. Mr. Bovell, what I will do is turn it over to Mr. Ogorzalak to walk us through some of the additional thoughts and amendments that you have proposed, which are addendum to the packet.
Yes, I can walk through those, and I'll note for the record that the executive sent these amendments over on Friday afternoon, which is why they're not in the initial staff report, and also to clarify that any of these amendments would need to be offered by a committee member for a vote. The first amendment offered by the executive branch is on page 2A2 of the addendum. It would actually amend the title, the chapter title and article title. This is one where staff does have an opinion. The chapters in the county code are alphabetized. To change this from weeds to vegetation would actually mean we need to change the number to 56A, and video games would become 56B. I'll also note that chapter titles have no legal effect, and so it would be a whole lot of work for something that doesn't have like a legal effect. I understand the spirit in which the amendment was offered, but that is one that staff would oppose.
I want a committee hearing on video games. I think that I understand the rationale behind the request. I understand the legal rationale for keeping things as they are, so I'm inclined to keep them as they are and not hearing any proposal.
So the next one referenced explicitly by Mr. Bovell on on page A3 of the addendum relates to the subdivisions as not the bill, but the existing law applies Chapter 58 to properties within subdivisions that were platted within 50-8 of the county code. This is almost everything that we would think of as the sort of apartment buildings, homes, single-family homes, multifamily homes, the sort of things that that is probably what people are thinking about when they think about this. Now, in the Ag Reserve and Up County, there is probably more property that has not been platted, so that is not subject to this. And it's entirely possible that it's not what we would traditionally think of as Down County, but sort of like Down County, sort of like Rockville and Down, or Gaithersburg and Down. There may be pockets where something hasn't been platted, but as a general proposition, we didn't have time to get a percentage or a list of properties from planning. This would not have a significant impact, I'll note, but this would just this proposed amendment would just extend the application of Chapter 58 beyond just those properties that are within a subdivision that was platted under Chapter 50-8.
Okay. No motions to move forward?
The next set of amendments I might just sort of group together because starting on A3 with the first amendment that is related to the definition of lawn, and then moving through, there are amendments to delete native plants, delete the definition of native plants, delete the definition of weeds, add definition of vegetation, and also have a requirement that lawns must be mowed below 12 inches at all times, as well as changing the existing language related to vegetation growing over a certain height within a certain distance from a property line. All of those sort of operate in tandem. As Mr. Bovell discussed, the justification for those, and maybe also I'll actually include the next amendment related to vegetation harboring pests. It really is sort of a different regulatory scheme. I'm not noting a legal objection or anything to any of these amendments, but it is just sort of in conjunction, all of those amendments just operate to change the regulatory scheme from what is presently set forth in existing law, the bill is introduced, and the amendments that the committee took up today.
I think the comment that you just shared about these amendments essentially changing the purpose of the legislation and some of the undermining law, I'm not inclined to move forward because I do think it changes entirely what the intention was. Again, I understand through the presentation some of the concerns that have been raised. I think I do not expect it to be widespread because the number of residents who've already commented and said that they want these are good stewards and they're good neighbors. They are either professional horticulturalists and gardeners or have such an avocation for it. I think some of the images that were shown, quite frankly, probably fall under the either nuisance or abandoned property law that is already existing. I don't know if anyone has any other additional comment. Yeah, Councilmember Stewart.
One, I just want to say thank you for the work, because I know a lot of thought went into this, but I do feel similarly to the chair that I am hesitant to move forward with these amendments, given that it seems to take us in a different direction than what was the purpose of this bill's intent and what we held a public hearing, what people thought we were doing today in committee. And I will be honest, having gotten these, and I know there was a lot of work that went into it, late on a Friday and trying to work our way through it over the weekend. And I'm going to fully admit, I am not a gardener. I am not a horticulturist. And so before I would even say, I think these are a good idea, there's a lot more I would want to hear from the public on this and try and vet that. So it's not to say that this isn't going in a good direction. It well may be, and you all are on the front lines doing this work. But I would very much encourage the county exec that if he wants these changes to be made, that he send them over to us to be made in a separate bill, and that we take them up in the appropriate way with a public hearing, with community input.
I appreciate those comments, and again, this is just a law that is always subject for amendment and reconsideration, not only on the residential side as neighbors see it being implemented, but also from the administration side. If there are questions that are raised or workloads that are changed because of it, this is an ongoing conversation, but this is the starting point, right, as we've had that public discussion. Councilmember?
Yes, same.
Okay. So
the next amendment set forth on addendum page 6 is similar to the amendment that the committee already considered related to immediate action for public health and safety. This amendment, though, did include reference to also allow the director, this is the director of DHCA, to require immediate action for violations in addition to Chapter 58 for violations of Chapter 8, 17, 22, and 26. This, again, is another one that staff would recommend not accepting. For one thing, council staff's position is that in Section 810, Section 1723, Section 2216, and Section 2615, these powers are already set forth for the applicable agencies. I would also flag that Chapter 8 and 17 are actually the agency authorized to take that action is actually the Department of Permitting Services, and for Chapter 22, it's Department of Permitting Services as well as MC. It's the fire chief, and so for those, there also is a potential disconnect here where the department, the DHC director, is wading in potentially to areas that have already been delegated to other agency heads.
Okay. We'll keep going.
Okay. The next amendment set forth in the addendum relates to appeals that was already discussed. The identical amendment was accepted by the committee. On page 7 of the addendum, returning to Article 2, which relates to invasive bamboo, the executive recommended deletion of the prohibition on the sale. And if you, to take this in tandem with the next amendment set forth on A8, it related more to bamboo that is already in the ground and a property owner's setting forth requirements for a property owner to treat, potentially remove, cut, take certain action related to bamboo that is in the ground. In essence, it sort of does the reverse of what is presently in the bill after the committee's votes. It removes the restriction on the sale, but then creates a restriction or creates requirements for property owners for bamboo that's already existing.
I'm not sure how to respond to this because I think Councilmember Stewart framed it in that these amendments came very last minute, so much so that there's an addenda that we have not been able to receive adequate public conversation about. But what strikes me as curious is that this set of amendments undoes the intention of the bill, where if I may, the intention of the bill was very specific in prohibiting the sale of invasive bamboo. and it does not discuss the removal of bamboo that is currently in the ground. Yet it appears that these two amendments reverse that. DEP?
With all due respect, it isn't a reversal. I think it's an adding on. I think the pushback on the sale is just that within Montgomery County, there would be jurisdictions that would not have a similar ban. All of our immediate boundary counties would not have a similar ban. It would be, an increase in effort on outreach and education around the ban on sale, but really the most impactful piece would be the ban on the planting and the transplanting. And then the additional removal piece was related to just the challenges that DHCA faces already with existing bamboo patches. So it was never our intention to reverse the purpose of this, but to add on to it and to be, operationally effective.
Thank you for elaborating on that. In our patchwork of government structure here, there are a lot of different laws that apply to the county, but they do not apply to the municipalities. And that rarely, if ever, stops us from doing what the county feels that we need to do. And the jurisdictions, be it the city of Tacoma Park or Rockville or Gaithersburg, can opt in and can mirror our policies. In some respect, sometimes they lead our policies and the county ends up adopting them after. But from the standpoint as the main author, I think that we need to prohibit the sale of bamboo within the stores that are in the county jurisdiction. And then with regard to the removal, that's where I started this conversation, trying to determine how we could request the removal of bamboo when there are, Hatfield and McCoy disputes. There are real arguments and neighborly fights that have occurred because of that nature. And when we've learned the cost of remediation, speaking of costs, that is the highest cost of anything that we're talking about. It is not the cost or burden of a 10-day required notice to remove or trim back. It would be to hire experts to dig deep and to untrench some of that bamboo. And so rather than add that burden to residents, we wanted to do no harm moving forward, which is why the sale would be prohibited under the law. I don't know if colleagues have any comments.
Yeah, I agree. In terms of the county having a prohibition on sale, we just went through the same arguments when we banned the leaf blowers. And that was one of the arguments that came to us. Well, you can buy a leaf blower online or other jurisdictions. And we dealt with that argument. So I agree with the chair on this.
Again, I appreciate the clarification. Did you want to make a comment?
I would very much like the opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Can you lower your mic so we can hear you?
Sure thing. There you go. So it was a three-part amendment. The first one was to, as you noted, remove the ban on the sale of it. But it was in addition to ban the planting and transplanting of it. So even if someone purchased it here, there, or in another jurisdiction, it could not be planted or installed across Montgomery County, which might be more effective than this banning the sale of it, maybe the two together for future debate. The third part of it was to require the management of bamboo in two specific instances. One, when it was within 10 feet of the property line or structure, to provide for free access and safety and in those types of hazardous conditions. And the second one was to manage the bamboo to eliminate conditions that would harbor things like colonies of birds that also harbor ticks, or rodents standing water underneath of it. There's no intention of removing all of the bamboo, digging up the soil, or actually removing it, but to manage it to a height that's appropriate for maintaining safety on adjacent properties, as well as eliminating the hazards, the health hazards that are associated with dense colonies of bamboo, like colonies of birds that also carry ticks, as well as rodents and mosquitoes, things like that. So it is a little bit more defined than what was initially, and I hope that clarification is helpful.
I appreciate that clarification. Again, what we're trying to wrestle with is some of the items that you noted with the burden of carrying that out. And again, the intention here is to do no harm moving forward. Should there be funding available for remediation purposes or anything else, I could see in the future supporting homeowners and property owners in that way with a program more defined. But short of any proposal now or any funding stream for it, I'm extremely hesitant to put any additional burden on the property owner.
And I do want to clarify that the amendment, that we just did add the amendment that a person may not plant or transplant invasive bamboo on any property. So we just added that.
That is correct. Clarify that. That's right. Thank you.
I was
Yeah.
getting really
No,
confused.
we did that.
Right.
May I also just add one other item? So with the keeping the ban on sale in the bill, we would need to adjust our FIS. We would need to educate all the retailers and nurseries everywhere in the county about that. So that was part of our memo.
Understand that. I disagree with that assessment, quite frankly, because while we have done public education campaigns on other things like plastic bags and on gas-powered leaf blowers, those are utilities. Those are functional items that people use in their daily life. In this aspect, it is the prohibition of the sale of something, much like there are other items that we have prohibited in Montgomery County. And I would just add that, and when it disappears, just like a few years ago, I think certain plastic items have been prohibited because of our recycling processes, not being able to take them. That was a law that came up, or regulation that came up, I think 3 years ago or so. It does not require a public education campaign, in my respect.
And I will also say it was part of the bill to ban the sale, correct, when it was
Correct.
introduced?
Yeah.
So it should have been part of the fiscal impact statement. I'm just going to say in terms of procedure here, the fiscal impact statement should be done on the bill that is introduced and had a public hearing. So the idea that it has to be done again is not on us, frankly, and it should not, we should not be at committee without a fiscal impact statement that is reflective of the bill that was introduced and had a public hearing. That does a disservice to this body. It does a disservice to the residents of the county in making sure that we are following our procedures. Because I can say this body has requested updated fiscal impact statements when we've amended bills, and we have been told it would not be done again. So I just want to be clear that fiscal impact statements should be done on the bills as introduced and that have had public hearings. So I just want to make that clear for the public. And I think, again, these amendments got to us kind of late, and I understand the remediation piece, but remediation bamboo is so difficult, and I don't even know if this is actually the appropriate thing. And so I would also say I think this is a conversation we have to continue having, knowing that we have a lot of residents. I've gotten in between neighbors, and some of them have tried. They have dug trenches, put in the wood, and done all that, and it hasn't helped. Spent lots and lots of money. So I appreciate the intent here, but I would also think we need a little bit more time to think about what we're saying in terms of the 15 feet from adjacent property, the 6 inches, because in my experience, which is very limited, granted and anecdotal, even people who have tried to do things, it hasn't really worked and has become kind of a nightmare and very expensive for them. So I would want to continue this conversation to figure out And hopefully if the county exec does send over additional changes to this chapter, maybe we can entertain them at that point. But I think we have to have more conversations about what does it mean to control and remediate bamboo.
Appreciate the Government Operations Committee Chair. Fiscal statement, impact statements is something you've spent too much time talking about. I hear you loud and clear, and I do understand the amendment as was just noted. I just disagree with it. I do not think a public education campaign needs to be waged. Taxpayer dollars need to be spent to tell people that bamboo is no longer for sale, because it will just be no longer for sale. And that's what Google is for, right? So appreciate that. And if the county executive, shout out, if the county executive feels differently, he can include it in his budget, and we'll get that in a few months' time.
If I may, thank you. We did actually, I think the question is actually we need a revised amendment. As we looked at these, and again, we apologize sincerely for how late these came over. DEP did a lot of research into the bamboo issue after this came over to us. And one of the challenges we recognize with the sale is that bamboo is not sold just for outdoor planting. So there are, you go to many restaurants and it may be on a table. It's in a house plant bundle. It's also planted in malls, retailers, large lobbies, and things of that nature. So we didn't see this as a public information campaign, but more for the nurseries. How do we differentiate when you can or cannot sell bamboo, and what is the intent that the person may do with that bamboo? So when we clarified that definition of what these running bamboos are, those running bamboos unfortunately are also in those household plants. They are in lobbies of retailers, et cetera. So there is a challenge for the retailers in what they can or cannot sell and what is the intent of that sale. So looking at the ban on the planting, we thought, aha, we have stumbled on something that takes care of this. If you can't plant it, you don't have to worry about whether or not it is sold for somebody in the county to use for another purpose. And the other thing also is that, sorry, I'm just losing my thought of the ban on the cutting of bamboo within those areas is that our adjacent jurisdictions, Prince George's County, Anne Arundel County, Fairfax, Fauquier, and Loudoun County have had similar bans for a while now, and Frederick is looking to adopt one as well. So we don't feel that we're coming out of the blue with something that is untenable to be able to figure out how to educate and enforce on, and it is complaint driven. As you mentioned, many of them are coming through these really difficult cases, but if DHCA can start with the discussions in the beginning before it gets to that point, that would help a lot.
Well, I'll continue the theme that's been shared, that this is the start of this conversation, and if we can actually learn from other jurisdictions as to what best practices are, we kind of a follow-up after this law is passed and begun to be implemented as to how to refine it and maybe bring it more into accordance with other jurisdictions.
And thank you. And I do believe that this very specific issue is one that we would need to inform and have another public hearing, because I think that the remediation and removal of existing bamboo is a much broader subject that will impact many more residents who I think would have a lot of opinion on that.
I appreciate that. It does fundamentally change the nature of the legislation. So. Mr. Garza.
And the final set of amendments, they are, according to the memorandum from the executive, non-substantive technical corrections. Legislative attorneys will look at those to the extent that any of these need to be incorporated into the law. The committee in footnote 3 has granted me that extraordinary power.
So given the timing of these amendments, let's defer to staff to review them, and if we need to bring them up at full council, we'll do that.
Wonderful. And then all that's left is the full vote.
Okay. Appreciate this very robust conversation. I'm not going to say the pun, but we went into all the details and appreciate the perspective that DEP and DHCA have brought to the conversation. Recognizing that this is the start of it, and as our residents continue supporting our natural environment, We will keep tabs on this, and if we need to change the law or need to change aspects of our executive function to make sure that they coexist better, you've heard all three of us say that we want to do this. And if it happens to be in the budget or thereafter, you have our support to do what you all need to do so that our residents can continue supporting the natural environment that we live in.
Yeah, I would just respectfully request that if there are further discussions or amendments or any other sort of additions to this, that maybe it's considered to be under the TE and a joint PHP committee, because most of what we do is with PHP. So I would just recommend.
Duly noted. The other bill I had went to PHP because that was specifically zoning. And that one might have a second hearing. We'll find out. I'll ask the chair. But appreciate this conversation. So colleagues, all those in favor of this amended legislation? And that's 3-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Garzalak. Thank you again, DHCA and DEP. We are going to have a joint session with public safety to talk about an entirely different issue. Let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll return. So thank you, everybody. Have a good
Thank you very
afternoon.
much.